Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. I know some of you, and there's a few I don't know, so this is great. Meet some new people. Before we get started, I would like to say Oki and welcome. The University of Lethbridge's Blackfoot name is Inixcum, meaning sacred buffalo stone. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, which is traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Kana, Piikani, Siksika, as well as Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Nakoda First Nation Region 3. We honor the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Indigenous peoples who have helped shape and continue to strengthen our university community. So I'll start with some introductions. I'm Jaimee Johnson. Hi, I'm your host for this evening. I've lived in Lethbridge most of my life, and this is the place I call home. I've worked here for many of the local theater companies over the past 6 years now, both community and professional theater. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater, Tech, and Design, graduating in 2008. I'm currently a graduate student here at University of Lethbridge and a graduate assistant for Asterix. Degree focusing on design. My current research involves looking at the representations of death in the visual arts across cultures in order to create the character of death for next semester's production of A Night at the Grand Guignol 2022. I'm also conducting practice-based research on mask making and a special effect that we will see in the show. I'd like to introduce Christina Milinusic next. Christina is an audio professional who has provided live sound reinforcement since founding her company Unity Sound in 2005. She's the current chapter head for Sound Girls Alberta and has experience working as an electronics technician, technical director, and recordist. Christina is currently an IMMA or Emma master's student at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome, Christina. Our next panelist for this evening is Carla Simon. Carla was born and raised in Arco, Idaho. She graduated with a bachelor's in costume design with a minor's in theater and art from Brigham Young University, Idaho in 2004. Carla married Peter Simon in 2005 and moved to Canada. She volunteered at the community theater companies in all of the towns she has lived. She loves creating Halloween costumes for her 4 children. She moved to McGrath in 2018, finally close to the University of Lethbridge. With her kids all in school, she decided to return to do her master's in fine arts with an emphasis in costume design for drama. So welcome, Carla. Carla and I work together studying the same field. And then our next panelist is Jaimee Jarvie. Jaimee graduated from the University of Lethbridge in 2013 with a Bachelor of Music in Vocal Performance. She has taught private voice lessons for 12 years and is currently a sessional instructor at the university, teaching the University of Lethbridge singers. In the summer of 2019, after a multiple sclerosis diagnosis, Jaimee decided to return to the university to pursue a master's in music and is currently creating a thesis project entitled Responding to MS Through a Research Creation Project. This project is a combination of live music, recorded interviews, and focuses on singers within the MS community. Interviews will focus on topics such as diagnosis, disease-modifying therapy, defining disability, and singing through disease, just to name a few. So welcome everybody to an Asterix Intersections event. We're very excited for this. This is our first Intersections event of the season, and it's called What in the World is Research Creation? And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. It's certainly not a new term. It's been around for many years, and we're here tonight to just have an informal chat about it, what our experiences something, but you don't want to speak up, that's perfectly fine to use the chat. And we will go ahead and get started. So what in the world is research creation? It's been gaining popularity and now becoming more common in recent years. So it's not new. Like we said, it's been around for years, but definitely newly accepted or newly recognized. What it is specifically is hard to define, and perhaps it shouldn't be defined in certain terms, as it's been in use and practice for so many years now. So before we try to define what it is or what it isn't, or maybe what it should be or how we use it, I'd like to start with maybe just our initial experiences with it. Because in talking to many people about it, what I have found in both students and faculty, staff, and professionals, that even very seasoned professionals or faculty have a hard time defining it themselves or using it to describe their own practices. A lot of students haven't even heard of research creation before. And that's exactly why we're here. So we can all relate. Many of us are going to have a shared experience of our own discovery of research creation. So I'll start with mine. Total transparency, I had never actually heard the phrase until last year, actually. I was sent some articles to read as a new master's student saying, hey, since you're doing your master's in fine arts, this is something you need to be aware of as a concept, and how you define your work and how you talk about your work. It's really important to understand. So here's some articles, take a read through and figure it out. So I read the articles and was like, huh? I still don't quite get it. So it can definitely be confusing and a daunting task to try and figure out what it is. And then it wasn't until Jaimee, Christina, Carla, and I took the Fine Arts 50/20 class, and we kind of got like the basics of what it is, and we talked about it a lot. We had a lot of these kind of discussions where we just would informally chat about what our thoughts are with it and what experiences we actually do have with it, not realizing that this is what we do in our practice as researchers. I don't know if y'all saw my my little thumbnail. I'm going to just stop my video for a second so you can see the little meme I made here, but it's Morpheus. This is, what if I told you artists are researchers and researchers can be artists? So that's basically, oh, sorry, Julia, Fine Arts 50/20 is the information information literacy. Was that it, Jaimee? Christina? Course? Information literacy course. Sorry, it's been a while. So that was the course that Sandra Cowan taught. And that's where we discovered a lot of different research practices. Yes, thanks, Tarek. And how to use the library's resources to conduct our research and all that fascinating stuff. So yeah, so that was my experience with research creation. So if I can call on Christina, what was your initial experience with it?
I think, honestly, I think I've been doing research creation for a long time, just because I like to do things and I learn by doing. And so for me, taking that artistic kind of investigation and then supplementing it with books that I'm reading, whether they be academic or just for interest, has been something that's kind of like been an informative thing for me for a while. But I didn't really know technically that it existed as a method until Sandra Cohen's class as well. So for me, it's really this kind of learning through doing, and through expressing, and then kind of taking these things and sewing them together, and kind of not necessarily always having like an exact thing that I have in mind to create, but allowing like the artistic process to flow based on kind of the academic things that I've been reading and the resources that I've been collecting through investigating them, which in my case is soundscapes. So that's what it's been for me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting how what the end result is when you never even imagine that's what it could be, because oftentimes your research will inform the artistic practice or the creation, right? So you don't always know what that's going to end up looking like.
I think it's helpful for me to have some sort of like, okay, how long do I want to make this, or what are the ingredients? But oftentimes when I'm like, set myself this, like, oh, I'm going to achieve exactly this thing, I don't. It doesn't actually work out exactly the way I want it. So I felt that kind of divorcing myself from those types of expectations allows maybe even some more interesting things to evolve, and to like, also because it's practice based, like as you develop more knowledge and more skills and work with things and figure out what how they can be sewn together comfortably or what works, then you know the material, the medium can kind of also impact the end result, which I think is one of the coolest things about arts-based research.
Definitely. Yeah. Jaimee,
Hello.
hi.
Christina, I like that you just talked about sort of getting rid of the expectations, because I feel like my project has taken about 10 to 15 different forms at this point. It's constantly changing. I too did not know that research creation existed before last year. And I did an independent study with Dr. Monique Giraud, where we started to read about it and learn about these things. And I still don't know if I can find my own definition for the term. I don't know. It changes all the time. So my project, I'm doing qualitative research with members of the MS community who are singers. And so I've got people from all over the planet who I'm going to be doing Zoom interviews with and talking about their own lives with disease and singing and wellness and connecting all of these things into a fully staged performance. And so sometimes I wonder if I'm doing research creation, or if I'm doing some sort of advocacy creation, or if I can't put a name to it yet. So I was excited, Jaimee, when you invited me to this, because I was like, I don't know what research creation is. What in the world is it? So I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to hear what your guys' take on it is. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. But yeah, it's interesting. And I'm doing a research assistant position right now as well. And I'm focusing on research creation, and I'm trying to organize all of these different things. And there's about 9,000 names for it that people use, and all these different ideas. And so to figure out what it has been challenging, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, we don't have to define it. Often that can be limiting, because there's all of these different definitions, and like we said, it does mean different things to different people. So I don't know necessarily that we should define it in certain terms. That's my opinion anyway, because it is going to mean something different to everybody.
I totally
And how you, sorry?
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully at the end of tonight we have a better understanding of what we all think about it and how we use it in our practices. But yeah, we don't have to say exactly what it is necessarily. So yeah, Carla, do you have any experiences about research creation? Your initial thoughts on it? What was your exposure to it?
Can you?
Are you driving? We can come to somebody else. Does anybody else want to take a turn at it? Or Carla, are you okay there to talk, or? Okay.
Doesn't
No,
sound.
that's okay. That's okay. Maybe not text and drive. We can move on. All right, bear with me here just a second here. Sorry, I have a new kitten and she's walking all over the place here too. Okay, so what is research in the arts and how do we use it? What role does it play in our art? I'll start and then we'll go around and see who wants to add their input. So for me, my research, I'd say, includes a lot of data collection. So I'm looking at, so when I do costume design, I'll be looking at pictures from magazines or old catalogs or anywhere that I would get references to period costumes if I was working on a period piece. So for example, we just did Design for Living, which was a period piece set in the 1930s. And I was the assistant costume designer on that piece. So I did a lot of research into historical costuming. We looked at old catalogs that you'd order clothes from back in the day, pictures from sewing patterns and things like that. So for me, that's data collection. Oh, Carla, your mic isn't working. That's okay. Analyzing text, that's another piece of the research that I would consider research. Conducting experiments as far as like, does this fabric work? Does this technique of making this garment work? And those are all things that I do to help me understand what it is that I'm doing or I'm trying to achieve. And it also helps me formulate more questions. So is this the right material for this? Oh, sorry. Lee has a question. What do I mean by analyzing the text? Great question, Lee. So analyzing the text would be first determining what are the things in the text. What does the script tell us that we need to know about the given circumstances of certain characters? So social status of character A, B, or C. What do they do for a living? What do they look like? What does the text say that their appearance is? Are they successful? Do they work? Where do they work? Do they wear a uniform for that job? So analyzing the text for all of those things that are what we say absolutes, so things we know. And then there's things that we would question as well. So if they're outside, do they need a coat? What's the weather like? What season are we in? Are these things that we can glean from the text, or we need to ask more questions? Yeah, so that would be analyzing the text. Oh, and looking for things like theme too. So what is the story saying? What is this about? Those sorts of things. So for me, that's what I do for analyzing the text. And that can involve several different readings of it. It could involve turning to other resources. So maybe I need to read the biography of the playwright to understand their perspective on the world at the time that they wrote it. So things like that would be part of analyzing a text. Yeah, so they help me formulate more questions. And often any kind of research that I do, the results could be more questions than answers, which is totally okay and part of the process. So let's turn to one of our panelists. Jaimee, do you want to start this time and tell us about how, what role does research play in your art?
Yeah, so my research is going to take place in the form of qualitative interviews with these people who are living with MS. And I've also sort of discovered that throughout this process, the research has sort of come from within me as well, because I'm someone who is living with the disease. And so I'm first and foremost, I'm a soprano. So I'm on stage, I'm a performer, I'm a creator. That's sort of where it starts for me. But I found that throughout my own practice this year, and just taking into account things that have happened in my body and changes and you know, connections between health and singing and the disease, that has sort of become part of my research as well, as this sort of self-reflexive, I don't know, I'm experimenting with different ways of using this body that's been changing and has been affected. And it's been really interesting. So in conversations with people in my interviews, I'm learning lots of stuff about their lives, but they're also using the things that we discussed to create music for this project, which I had never planned on. I've got people sending me music from all over the planet in all different styles because they're sort of inspired by the research to create. So it's been a really interesting process to see how everything has unfolded out of these amazing conversations and interviews with people.
That's awesome. Christina.
So I think that, you know, one of my favorite singers is Nina Simone, and she has this quote that says, "Artists kind of have a duty to reflect on the time." I don't think I'm quoting it exactly right, but essentially that's what artists do. And I think as scholars, what we're doing is we're trying to take the work and the research that's done before us and kind of extend it, not necessarily repeat it or do the same research again, but build on it. And that's part of like why we spend so much time reading. And in my undergraduate degree, I got very interested in soundscapes. And so there's this very, pinnacle book about soundscape written by the now unfortunately we lost him earlier this year, but R. Murray Schafer. And it kind of defines the soundscape very much so as something in human terms. So it's within human hearing range. And the human hearing range is very filtered and limited. So we hear from 20 kilohertz or 20 kilohertz down to like 20 hertz. And really the low frequencies from about 180 hertz down to 20 hertz, we're really more feeling them as vibrations than we're hearing them as these mechanical sound pressure waves. And so I'm a member of the Audio Engineering Society, and most of the measurements that we do in our daily, everyday environment take account for this dBA weighting. And so dBA weighting doesn't even account for the low frequencies of the soundscape. So with my work,
can I ask what is dBA reading?
So it means like the loudness. So decibels is how we measure the loudness of a sound. So you have different weightings of loudness essentially. So a dBc would actually take into account a little bit more low end, but it would still be limited to that human hearing range. And so we all know that the world is not just limited to the sounds that humans can hear. You said you had a kitten. Well, your kitten can hear up to 80 kilohertz, which is ultrasonic. And then when you think of other creatures around, like bats, well, they're actually communicating and hunting using like sonar and echolocation, which again is in that ultrasonic, like above the human hearing range. And so I'm interested in suggesting that maybe not using the word soundscape, but vibroscape or something, so that we can extend our kind of definition of what we measure and what we're looking at, what we're actually researching as scientists, not just as artists, in everyday life. And I think that will help us understand a more holistic ecology. And so R. Murray Schafer was also part of the World Soundscape Project, which was based in Canada, and two other participants were Barry Track, so he does this artistic communication, and this one that's really kind of awesome, Bernie, yeah, this is Bernie Krause, and this is the Great Animal Orchestra. And so it talks about all these other species and how our anthrophonies, our human-made sounds, are impacting other species. So with my work, I think it's kind of my duty to reflect on the fact that we're doing this scientific research and measuring it as the Audio Engineering Society within a very narrow bandwidth. And I'm just hoping to widen that bandwidth. So we look at what's going below and above the human hearing range, because we're absolutely making sounds that go below and above our hearing range. And so I kind of want to draw attention to that in my work. I don't know if that was like a very long, drawn out
No, that's great. That's
explanation.
actually really great. I'm just curious how you would um, expand that or draw attention to that.
So, well, the great thing is we have technologies now that allow us to visualize the sounds above and below the human hearing range. So, one of my original projects with my thesis was to make an ultrasonic microphone, but you can just buy them if you have enough funding, and then you can also do kind of like piezoelectric pickups or even huge speakers to look at and investigate the infrasound. And what I've actually discovered is that, the beauty of being academic is that sometimes, or just human, it's like you don't have to do absolutely everything. These recordings actually already exist out there. So I got some permission from the Cornell library that has a beautiful soundscape to use some of their elephant recordings. So I can analyze those, and I can pull up I can pull up Audacity. So with Audacity, you can actually set the upper and lower frequency ranges. So you can look like way up to see if something in a recording might have 80 kilohertz. And granted, you have to take in these, other parameters. It has to be sampled at a very high rate in order to see those, because you'll get a kind of, because of the Nyquist theorem, essentially, which is an audio term, but you have to sample at double the frequency. Like you'd have to record at double the frequency that you want to actually listen to or visualize in this case, because we can't actually hear 80 kilohertz. So, and Audacity is a free software, as I think Tarek has pointed out. So
just saw that in the chat. Yes, audio editing software. For those of you who don't know, free audio editing software Monique adds. So that is amazing.
I can actually show you, if you let me screen share for a second, I can show you like a sample. I made a little, what it's called a sniffer. And so what it is essentially just a guitar pickup. And I went around my neighborhood and I went to like the locks of doors or an LED screen or a telephone wire, and you can listen to these things. And so if you look at this, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
So if you look at this, you can see, oh, there's not that much going on, but this is the sample. I don't know if it'll play. So it's like just buzzing, right? That you normally don't hear when you walk by. You don't hear it to that extent, but the inductor coil like is vibrating kind of in resonance with it, so it does. And so you can actually see like, oh, well, what's going on with this spectrum? And oh, there's this big peak around 10,000 hertz, and this isn't set up quite right. Because my recorder that I used for this only samples up to 48 kilohertz. So I can't really see like way up in this high end range, but it's something that's worth investigating just so that we know all the vibrations that are going around in the world around us that we might be not particularly aware are even there, because they're kind of invisible, right? Especially if we can't hear them. So I think it's interesting, and it's a cool way to use technology, because it's like having this like augmented ear. It's like, well, I can't hear it with an unaided ear, but I can use technology to hear this, to see this. And I think that's a really cool way to use technology, rather than just using it to do stuff we can already do,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And Jaimee, do you use technology in any of your research or your?
Kind of, yes. So because a lot of most of my participants are global, all of my interviews are going to be on Zoom and filmed. I'm going to have to project everything in between the live music. So I'm actually using more technology than I know what to do with. And so that's actually caused not a problem for me, but it's been a process in that I've had to find somebody like a research assistant who can actually help me with the technology, because I don't have that skill. And so that has been sort of another element of the research that I've had to add on top, is to bring in another person who can actually make this stuff happen for me, because I am not technologically inclined like Christina is.
Very
So,
technologically inclined, yes.
more technology, yeah, than I expected to use, but it's necessary. So
That's okay. Don't feel bad about that, because I am not technologically inclined either. I mean, I use a sewing machine. I use basic technology, computers, that sort of thing. A couple of things in the chat here that we didn't quite catch here. So Monique had said, I like this idea, Jaimee. This is when you were talking before, that you need to listen to your body as part of your research practice. It challenges the idea that we need to try to be objective when we don't, or sorry, when we know that we can't, and embrace the learning that we can gain from being deeply in tune without our bodies. So thank you, Monique, for that. Okay, Carla would like me to talk about the 3D scanning. Okay, so personally, I'm not using this, but I am there. So I guess we can call that part of my research too. I'm witnessing it and kind of assisting Carla, who is assisting me with some face scans that we are doing. Basically, the plan was to cast each individual actor's face in like a plaster pour, so that we can do a mask creation workshop with the actors. And then I can start working on some of the other masks in my own explorations with the representations of death, sculpting skulls on these faces. So we need a whole bunch of castings of these faces. Well, we need 2 minimum of these faces. So what we did, Carla has them, Marianne. I'm sure she'd be happy to share them with you at some point. We just did some today. She used, Carla, is it Rhino something software? I think it is. So I can't remember. This is what I'm saying, Jaimee. I'm not technologically inclined at all, but Carla was a total whiz at this. So the original plan was to cast the faces using kind of like a more manual, I guess, technique. So what we did was we put alginate on the person's face, and it's basically like a medium that helps take an imprint of the face. They use it in dental offices to get imprints of your teeth. And then we put plaster bandages on top of that to seal them. And then you let it dry, and then you pop it off. And then you pour your plaster into that mold, that negative, and then you get your positive. One of the challenges that we ran into was that it was a totally new process to a lot of us. So it didn't quite work out the way we thought it was going to work out. So the plan was to just do straight plaster bandages, but I guess it's not really a safe method to use anymore. So Carla so graciously volunteered to help us with a technology-based version of doing these face castings, and it's worked out really well. So she did one of her own face, and what she did was she had this like scanning device, pretend this is a scanning device, and it scanned her face. And then she puts it into a program where she cleans up. Sometimes it doesn't scan it perfectly. Like our skin is nice and smooth, but when you see the scan, there might be some bumps, or there might be some things that she needs to fill in. So for example, like behind the ear, there might have been like a little hole there that she may have had to manually change. And she got a new scanner that actually does like pretty much a perfect scan. So there isn't a whole lot of cleanup. Like I think it's scanned. We did meet today, and it's scanned just to here, and it just filled in the rest of my chin and neck, which was just awesome. So then what she does is she cleans it up, and then she 3D prints it. So then we have a nice, beautiful representation of the person's face. So it's ready. It's there in plastic, less risk of it being damaged. And then we can plaster cast that face as though it were a real face, or plaster bandage, method, that face. We're going to put the plaster bandages over that. Then we can create another negative And then we have, you know, a mold that we can pour multiple times should something break. So that's one of the fun examples that Carla has for some of the technologies that she's using in her research. And now it's helping in my research. So thank you, Carla. So yeah, that was lots of fun. I got my face scanned today. We had some of the other actors come in and get their faces scanned. Mia, you might get your face scanned. So that'll be fun. And then you can even print it in a negative mold too. So that might be another option down the road. So yeah, it's just oh, you're welcome. Thanks for letting me share your research. I probably didn't explain it as good as you could have, because you're the one who's doing it. But there's a lot of like technical stuff about it that I don't have the knowledge behind it. Marianne, do you have some familiarity with the scanning? Oh, and Marianne, Carla says she doesn't have any images that she can share at this point, but I'm sure she'd be happy to once they're ready. Okay, so you do have a bit of experience with that. That's awesome. It's actually something I want to get into. So it's interesting, Jaimee, what you were saying about your research participants who are now like wanting to do their own thing. And I'm doing the same thing with based on Carla's research. She's even done some like special effects gelatin research. And I had a really bad allergic reaction to one of the products that we used in one of my classes for stage makeup. And I had to find an alternative way of doing something to my face and different things to put on my face. And Carla's been experimenting with a lot of gelatin for prosthetics and stuff for stage makeup and special effects. So I thought, well, hey, if that's working for her, I should look into this and see if that's another option for me. So I ended up doing some research on it and creating my own little batch of gelatin, things that I could melt down and use as special effects makeup. So yeah, it's interesting how some of the research experiments or creations other people are doing then inform our own practices. Has anything that anyone you've worked with changed how you're doing things?
I wouldn't say that it's changed how I'm doing things, but I think that it's changed the end result of what my project is going to be. Because initially it was going to be more focused on this ensemble that we have in town. Like I've got a live ensemble that's going to be doing Jeff Beal's The Salvage Men, which is a choral piece that he wrote in the midst of his own diagnosis. I'm trying to keep, as many people involved within that community as I can. And so I think that in meeting these people and in having them sort of reflect on their own lives and create their own art, it's going to kind of reshape what I had envisioned, which is a beautiful thing because I think it's going to take on this whole new life with more insight from people other than myself, which I don't really want to focus on me. I love to see their stories. And so it's really like a beautiful thing how it's kind of unfolded within this web of people in this community to become something again, totally different than what I had initially thought, but it's very inspiring to see them come forward and want to create something within this project themselves.
Yeah, that's really exciting to inspire us. That's kind of what the hope is for a lot of people with their creations is that is this going to promote a positive change? Is there going to be some economic or social impact that will help better the world? So sometimes that's the goal. Lee, great question in the chat here. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So the question Lee poses is, do you ever run into people not thinking this is actually research? Personally, no, not yet. I'm sure I will run into people who don't think it's research. A lot of people don't see their own work as research necessarily. For example, just a general example, someone I was talking to, a faculty member had talked about needing to prepare a research presentation, and they were like, what? I don't do research. And just realizing that the work that they're doing actually is research. What about either of you, Carla, Christina, or Jaimee? Have you ever run into anyone who's decided that you're not actually doing research?
I want to say no, not yet. People have been they've been pretty good about it, and if I take it away from the performance aspect and discuss the interviews and the people that I'm discussing it with, then they're more inclined to say yes, it is research. So I haven't been met with any of that yet. So
I think we're both kind of fortunate, but there is a huge sector out there that doesn't believe art is work and believes that art should be paid maybe less than other industries, which I kind of disagree with, because I think art motivates those other disciplines and helps people get through their day, and we need it, and it's essential, and this is why we have brilliant artists out there making creations. So I think that hopefully that idea that you're just doodling or whatever goes away. But it's also, you don't want to elevate art to the point where it's like not accessible to everybody, because art's something that everybody can practice, and like it doesn't have to be a Picasso. It can just make it. It can be therapeutic. Like there is I think Monique pointed this out, like there's health benefits to to coloring, to singing, to listening, to all these things, and we kind of sometimes get caught up in what we have to do to survive, that we forget how the arts can bring us and ground us into those things that make us able to really love life and enjoy life and keep us vital and healthy too, hopefully, on a spiritual level and a psychological level, maybe more than a physical level. But I think that's really important, especially right now.
Oh, absolutely. And Monique says, and thereby better understand the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, something else in the chat here. Have you ever had trouble with committee members who don't know how to evaluate if your project is working or not? As a social science student, this is a big concern with my grad committee right now, and looking at pursuing research creation instead of a more traditional thesis. I personally have not had any trouble with committee members evaluating whether a project is working. I'm so sorry, Alyssa, I don't know how to answer that question. I would consider talking to your supervisor or with academic advising and see what kind of suggestions can be made there. But yeah, personally, I don't have any experience with that. Okay. But I mean, research creation is certainly a valid method of sharing your research results. And as far as what we were talking about with health benefits and the doodling and that, I mean, there was a big movement with the coloring books not that long ago, like just 5 or 6 years ago, where everybody was getting into it because it was therapeutic. And in fact, creative art therapy has been around since the 1940s. Mia had put something in the chat earlier that I forgot to bring up here. When Christina, when you were talking, she said, yes, body research, body-led research, somatic research. So very important to keep expanding the notions of what research creation is. Also, rather than to prove something, artists are here to show us something. Very true. So even scientists use art as a way of informing their research practices. In fact, even just how important art is in general. I think let me find it here. Albert Einstein said something really profound here. He says, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Okay, so Courtney says it would hazard a guess that you decide what working means. What is the success point for your creation? And Lee says that is the challenge. Not everyone feels that way. As far as art, Lee, like for imagination, or sorry, which part?
Yeah, as far as art being necessary, I mean, that's even conversations that, that I've certainly had, in my life with even, my own family, like not having a sense of, that art is valuable, that what I do is actually work, as some who said that earlier, like the idea of people thinking that that art is somehow less work. And and that art is not research, that it's not on the same sort of level. And this is something that, I suppose, coming from the professor, perspective is something that, we have to deal with even to defend our jobs and our work, right? When research is required as part of our position, and the research that you're doing is not considered by research as some, like, oh my goodness, like, you're not only having to do all of this work, but you're having to defend that it's valuable, that it's significant, that it means something, that it is in fact a lot of work, that it is in fact research. This whole topic is very close to heart, I think, with many of us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's not about publishing, that journal article or whatever that may or may not get looked at by anyone. And that's the other really good benefit to these research creation ways of doing things, is that it has a much wider reach. More people, it's more accessible. So I think that's really important as well.
Christina, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it makes me think of how we live in a society that's really about measuring things and like placing things on kind of this linear scale, is like, well, this has this value and this has this value. And it's very materially minded. It's like, this is how much this weighs, this is this. But again, it's all filtered, like the human hearing range, from like what we can measure, what we can sense, what we can perceive. And although, of course, as humans, this is very important, this is how we, like run our economies and all these things, there's so much that isn't measurable that is fundamental and foundational for all those things that are measurable. And one of the things I'm doing is kind of modifying a Chladni plate. And what a Chladni plate is it's like a kind of a special speaker, and you put a plate on top of it, and as you put the sand on top of the plate, it will make shapes. So this is called semantics, but not with an S. I can't pronounce these things right. I apologize. I'm not good at that particular thing. I can wire it up, but not pronounce things right. But what I want to show with that is like, well, these vibrations that we can hear also make matter move. It is measurable. But there's a disjoint. We often think that these things that we can't easily measure and quantify and slice out don't exist, but that's not true, and they're directly impacting what we can measure. I think it's important to point that out. And what you said really, like, that's where it hit home for me. And that's how we have to not maybe judge ourselves sometimes with that type of thing too. It's like, well, I have to do 100 paintings or I won't be successful, or I have to do this, and it's like, well, those are great goals to set for yourselves, but maybe it's good as a horizon and not something to be attached to. Like the stuff you can measure, I think, will come, right?
Absolutely. And then something you said earlier, you said materially, what was the word that you used? Materially measured?
Yeah, we live in like a world where we want to quantify everything, and we like measure everything, and it's like, you're this height, and you have these features, and it's like, well, those are all true, but that's not the gestalt of who that human is, right? You can't just reduce it down to just the things that are measurable, can you? There's always something kind of, at least in my experience.
agree. We talked about this so much in our information technology class. It was a really great discussion about that because we kind of came to the conclusion that it's because we're materially motivated, right? It's the money that people want, and it's the money that gets used as a motivating factor to have these things that are more, say, akin to like doing something in the sciences side. So as artists, are we trying to um, be researchers for that, or yeah, I mean, how do we measure our success is a good question here. And Courtney had said, what working means, what is the success point of your creation? I guess for me, the success point would be like, did I achieve the outcomes? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be like you said, those measurable things. I didn't create 100 paintings. That's okay, but did I create the painting that achieved the outcomes that I had hoped to achieve? Like, did I use, the right formulation of paint I wanted to use, or did I, all of those things that you think about as you're doing the creation. And for me, success would be, did I achieve those, and did someone come away from it with something, right? Did it affect someone in some certain way? I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be profound, but did it reach somebody, right? Exactly this. If art is experimental or experiential, how can we share this as the outcome rather than some other predetermined metric? Why does there need to be an identifiable outcome? I guess that depends. I mean, I don't know if I could totally answer that question, but I guess that depends on which definition of research creation you may or may not subscribe to. Some would say that there does need to be an identifiable outcome. For me, I mean, I think I feel better myself if there is some identifiable outcome. But yeah, Jaimee or Christina, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of thinking about it as you guys discuss it, and I feel like my end goal, my outcome has sort of changed at this point, and it's less about the audience because it's going to be a performance piece and more about the participants. And the more I speak with them and the more that they share their stories, I think at this point I could not have an audience and I would be just fine as long as those people felt as though they were able to, express something and share their art and share their, I don't know. It's just, there's just a million things going through my head as you all talk. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what my outcome is. I think I mean, I guess, yeah, it is to reach someone in some capacity, but who? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have that answer either. So yes, so you at least partially determine the value of your research creation on its impact on others. Yeah, I do, because they don't do it just for me. I mean, it's nice to have some impact on someone. I mean, even if it's just, I have more questions about this, or that's, sorry, nice or necessary. I don't think necessary. I think just nice. Yeah.
I think
Okay.
as technology, like Monique said something really cool. Like it would be neat if we had journals that showed us rather than tell us. And like I totally agree with also what Courtney is saying. Like art, it's also the experience. Like some of the greatest memories I have are experiences. They're not things. They're not really measurable. They're these like experiences that I had. Especially when I think of great performances, like the experience of going to a Cirque du Soleil show or something, right? But I wonder, I'm curious, like I'm interested to know more about this idea of Monique's kind of with like doing a journal that isn't just something you read, but something you could also kind of interact with. That sounds really kind of engaging and nice.
Mm-hmm. Monique says here, I think that's a good point, Jaimee. In Indigenous research, we want the impact to be on the community, hopefully a positive impact, not the audience, academic or otherwise. Jaimee, you may feel the same about the people, communities you work with.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So I have a relative who is lovely, but very pushy. And it's like, oh, you should invite neuroscientists. Oh, you should invite this and that. And the next person, they need to know about this. And it's just so far from what I'm trying to do. It has become like, and initially when I came in here, I didn't even really know that qualitative research could be part of this. And it took a total shift. And I really do feel like it's become just a voice for these people who are so often just medicalized in this disease and don't actually get the chance to just sort of discuss their lives and their experiences. And so it's interesting because yeah, like I said, I don't know, it's that the audience it doesn't really matter to me in the depth of my soul anymore. It will be lovely to have them. It will be lovely to have the feedback, but I think it's become so much more about the community than making it a performance.
For me too, like the main reason why I'm doing soundscape works is because I think that the animals in our lives, like the livestock animals especially, etc., they often don't get heard. They often don't have voices. And I think that, and same with, like, I don't know, even just the sounds that we hear around us every day, like traffic sounds that are kind of these ubiquitous sounds in our world. And we don't really listen to them, we kind of ignore them. And really what I'm trying to do is amplify those voices so that we can actually listen to them. And so maybe some people want to listen to them, that would be great. But I think it's my way of kind of honoring the land and the animals, and also becoming more aware of the sounds that we as humans make. Is why I think that this is something I'm researching.
So how would that inform, like, when you say the kind of noises humans make? I'm really curious about that.
Well, because so since the 1970s, there's been a tremendous amount of research as to how, like, certain sounds cause humans and animals lots of stress, like sirens and lots of traffic sounds. And you can look at the cardiovascular system and take these very quantifiable measurements in humans and other species of how they're responding to these things. But we just take these kind of soundscapes of our world as necessary, and we don't really design them, you know. And I really think that I just would like some more critical engagement of, like, consciousness around the sounds that we produce in the world, because they're affecting not only our health but the health of, like, so many other animal species out there. And we're not even looking at all of the whole range of sounds we're producing, you know. So I think that's a really good, realistic place to start. So hopefully it brings community in the sense of, like, a non-judgmental, sometimes humorous way of deep listening, you know, which is a tradition that, you know, was pioneered by Pauline Oliveras, again in the 70s. So this stuff has been around for a long time. And with our world, like, sound is changing drastically. Like, actually the world was a much louder space in the 60s and 70s as it is now. But, you know, there's also this other book that I'm getting a lot out of called Spaces Speak, Are You Listening? And it kind of shows that, you know, there's acoustics around us all the time. So how sound is absorbed in a forest is very different than how sound is kind of reflected and absorbed on a open, you know, prairie scene. And how our buildings actually, you know, are participants in the shaping of sound, and which types of frequencies those buildings will kind of amplify or subtract is an important thing to take into consideration. So there's this whole, you know, field of acoustic architecture, essentially.
Interesting. Yeah. That's really fascinating. Monique's asking a question here, Christina. The Common Book Project is Robin Kammerer's book. In it, she talks about how trees have an underground network where they can communicate. Do you
Yeah,
know if
so
plants make music?
it's actually the trees communicate directly with fungus systems that happen like very, very close to the surface. So when we go in there with like big bulldozers, we ruin that network of like kind of grandmother trees telling the little trees, and they'll send nourishment. So it depends how you want to think about communication, right? So is the fact that one tree is sending nourishment through this, neural network, is that communication? And it also this is why the definition of sound is really problematic to me, and soundscape is really problematic because it's literally looking at this tiny little sliver of the vibratory spectrum that goes way below and way above what we as humans can hear. And we know this, like the planets are making sound, so to speak, but in order for us to hear it, we have to like multiply that sound thousands and thousands of times, right? And so it really depends what you define as sound and what you define as vibration, and then what is the communication? When is the communication happening? Well, to me, the sound is happening as communication at the ear, right? At the listener, when it's perceived, when it's sensed. But like it's also kind of this like philosophical issue, right? It's like, well, does the tree fall in the forest? Does it make a sound? Well, yeah, it's falling. It's, making waves, pressure waves move through those air molecules, whether or not somebody is there to hear it, which would be the communication of the tree falling in the forest. But like, regardless, the tree's still falling down, right? Like there's still a mechanical movement. So it's hard because we kind of, yeah, these definitions can be a little bit problematic. And I want to read this book and look up this artist that somebody said, an artist, earlier in the chat, Mary. So I'm gonna have to research these things.
Very cool. So do you know if plants make music?
So there's some cool experiments where like we can put electrodes on plants, like or a mushroom or anything, and we can kind of take that resistance and we can sample it essentially and turn that into music, or what we would hear as music. I mean, everything that's moving is kind of making, it's moving. Like sound is movement. Sound is like, I love this definition of sound as touch at a distance. Like that to me is kind of a unification of this, like, very tactile sense, and this, incredible hearing mechanism. Like our hearing mechanism is absolutely incredible. Like we have these tiny little bones, and then in the cochlea, it's actually like a hydraulic system that gets transferred into an electrical system. So synapses like fire in the brain. Like it's so, our sensory system is so incredibly fascinating. And then the sensory systems of other animals are also really fascinating, like the ears of your cat and how they differ. And even like when you think about other senses, like the smell, like look at the smell feature of my dog's nose. They smell in stereo. Like they have billions more neurons in their brains for those things. So it's like, to me, this stuff is just, there's not enough time in every day to research all there is. And so it's hard to set those parameters of like, okay, I have to focus on just this, because if I can just get this part done, then other people will be working on this stuff and more will get created and known about, right? Yeah,
Future
dogs totally
projects, right? Or future research endeavors to take, because that's, yeah, there's never enough time. Monique says, I want to also re-emphasize that our understanding of sound is ableist. The ideas you are bringing forward, Christina, move us beyond ableist understandings of sound.
Hope so. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I wouldn't have thought it to be that, yeah, totally. You're right.
And Tarek agrees.
I can share some of the methods I'm using, like to catalog these things. So because it can become kind of overwhelming. So like
Please do. Yeah,
yeah.
methodology is important in this. So let's,
So
yeah.
this is kind of what I've been doing. So this is my geophony catalog so far. So these are all recordings that I've taken, and some of them are recordings like one was from a NASA website, I think of some planets, right, which I would categorize in this. There are three main categories so far of soundscapes. So there's geophonies, which is sound that's created in like the land, and there's biophonies, which is kind of non-human animal sounds, and then there's anthrophonies, which are human-produced sounds. So I have these catalogs that kind of correspond to the three different Excel sheets. So as I take recordings, I'm cataloging them in both of these sheets, and then I can go back and I can use them for the creation of some pieces, which I don't know if we have a few minutes to listen to this one, but this is called, this is what I'm working on this week, and I got a recording from a friend of mine who has a pig farm. And so he sampled his pig. He had a talkative pig. So he sampled it and sent me his iPhone recordings, and I kind of sliced it up. First, I put it in the sound catalog under biophonies, and then further segments like this is a mammal, this is a pig, right? So after it was cataloged, then I brought it into the DAW and kind of made this composition with it. And I also added another soundscape because I'm kind of interested in conscious eating. So I recorded bacon as the background. So I'd love to play this.
To the pigs?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I don't know if you want to listen to this, but it's a little, I don't know. I'm going to try and get it working.
Yeah.
I'm not sure my computer is being weird right now, so I'm gonna try and I might need a minute to set this up. Actually, it's being a little weird for me, but I will play. My desktop folders are not happy. Oh, here we go. Okay, our pig here. So I'm gonna just change over to a different, and you guys, like, please just jump in and tell me to stop if this bothers you, or if you have had enough after a few moments of listening to it, okay? So just in the interest of time, it is actually kind of sad. It's a bit of a, it's not the easiest thing to listen to, but it's my way of paying homage and reflecting on what's happening in our time that we kind of ignore at the supermarket sometimes. So, but anyways, in the interest of time and to not take up too much time, I'm gonna not play the whole 3 minutes, but that's kind of what I've been working on. So
Very interesting. It almost sounded like I don't know, I thought I heard like almost like video game noises in the background.
yeah, so I've like synthesized the pigs essentially. And yeah, it's a bit of a downer, but I think
It's still
there's some
really
quality
interesting
in there
work,
too.
though.
Yeah, I'm trying to remarry things. Like I think we've divorced ourselves because it is such a downer to think of how we exist if you know, and I'm not trying to make judgments on like, oh, everybody should be vegetarian. I just think that it's important to have some consciousness around this stuff that always happens behind the scenes. Like that pig, in my opinion, was a pretty good communicator, you know. And then to layer the time, okay, well, this is the pig walking and having a walk and kind of, you know, communicating, and then this is where it ended up, you know, after it went to the abater. And I think it's important that we have that dialogue, because if we did, maybe we wouldn't have so many factory farms. Maybe we would have more farmers like my friend Lance, who, you know, has a small farm and cares about his animals, and, you know, doesn't have them in bad living conditions, essentially, right?
Well,
So
and
we have some
sometimes the way
reverence
to make that
for
statement is to be a downer. Sometimes you have to be um, controversial, I guess, for lack of a better word. Is going to upset some people to make people think. Marianne says, Christina, there's another artist for you, Jacob Kierkegaard,
Thank you.
Labyrinth. Labyrinth is the piece that consists of sounds generated in his ears. The Tartini tone creates another frequency in the ears of the listener.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm trying to get into this touch at a distance and do some binaural stuff, so it really does feel like you're kind of connecting.
And then Jaimee, having stepped away, has no idea what's going on. So in case you didn't catch that, Jaimee, we were listening to pigs and the sound of bacon sizzling in the background as one of Christina's creations.
So it's kind of weird, but at least as, you know, research creation, you have the freedom to do some stuff like this that we probably wouldn't have to. I don't know how commercially viable this is, but I think it's important as a reflection of our time.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll speak for Mia. She'll say the weirder the better. So why not? Okay, I'm just checking the chat to see if anything other questions come up. I'm interested in Jaimee and Jaime's thoughts on collaborative work, given their orientation in overall non-technological areas. Do you feel like you need to do collaborative to complete the kinds of projects you hope to complete? That's a good question. I think it's important to do collaborative work um, regardless, but especially not having, you know, a lot of technological background. I could never have done what Carla did today without her. So to be able to have that relationship and collaborate and get, you know, a common goal achieved is really helpful. So absolutely, I think collaboration is key. Jaimee?
Yeah, I agree. I think with what I'm doing, it's necessary just because I don't have the skill. But I do sometimes worry about finding the right collaborative partner, because it does need to be somebody who, yes, they might have the skill, but I think they also have to have some sort of conviction to the work that you're doing to really collaborate rather than just work for you. So I think that it needs to be a careful process of finding somebody that sort of meshes with your art.
Absolutely. Would you work with somebody who was one of the few people who had the skills that you didn't necessarily mesh with, or would you wait and potentially
I'm more on
push
the
up
side of
deadlines or get behind on things?
I'm more in favor of waiting to find somebody that I really can work with, because I think that if you're working with someone that you don't mesh with, are you really creating your art to its fullest degree? I don't know. It's hard to say. I haven't worked with anybody that I haven't been able to work with, but it's just like I still haven't found the student that's going to be editing my work. And so it's going to be a process of meeting people and seeing if the thought processes are the same and if we're on the same page with things and if you can communicate with them, because it's a totally different realm. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what they're doing with my work. So it needs to be, you kind of have to meet in the middle somewhat. So I would favor waiting to find the right person. That's just how I work.
That's fair. That's fair. For me, I guess it depends on the situation. I mean, if it's gonna, if there's only one person who had that skill and they were a person I just, couldn't work with necessarily. Yeah, that would be a tough call. Would be a tough call. Lee asks, if you had to define it, would you call it practice-based research or research-based practice? Could you categorize it? Should we? Very good question. For me, I would probably call it, I don't know, because I could call it either. For me, practice-based research is doing the things and conducting the experiments and I don't know, I guess doing the practices that inform the research. But for research-based practice, yeah, I'm honestly not sure if I could categorize it, to be honest, because Monique asked, does it shift over the course of a project? Yeah, I think it can. It definitely can. And there's just so many definitions of it. I'm not sure if we should categorize it because it can change so often. But yeah, that is a really good question. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how I would answer that. Do we have to? I don't think we do. I don't think we have to. Because that can be limited. I mean, if we've defined it a certain way and that definition has, these criteria and the other definition have these criteria, we've then, limited ourselves to how we can define it, I guess, categorize it, defend it, get the grant. I'm not sure what you mean.
Oh, what I mean is that whether we want to or not, do we find ourselves in a position where, in order for our research creation, whatever it is, to move forward, to get where it needs to go, do we need to play by other people's rules? Do we need to define it so that we can defend what it is, so that we can support it, so that we can get the support that we need to move it forward? In this case, I was specifically referring to grant applications and those sorts of things. Like, do we have to, even if we don't want to, for practical reasons? Like, where does the practicality fall into it? These are things that I think about with my own work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, in those circumstances, yeah, you have to, because if you want that grant, you do have to frame your work within their definition of research creation. And different agencies will have their own specific definitions that they follow as well. Like SSHRC has their own. The Canada Arts Council has a different definition of it. So I guess it depends on what you want, right? Yeah, Monique says, agree. Depends. Yes, what Lee says, I think it depends on the context. Yeah, but that is a very good question that we need to ask ourselves coming out of this and thinking about it.
Be curious to see what Christina and Jaimee, how you feel about that.
For me, it's cyclic. Like I go out and I take the recording and then I use the recording, or even while I'm making my sound catalog, I kind of figure out, okay, well, what's missing? Like how do I fill this in? So it's like, as I practice, I figure out what I need to research. And then as I research, I'm kind of implementing that knowledge into the practice. So it's like not really one or the other. It's like I go through these phases where I'm, more in a practice mode and a creation mode, and then other times where really what I'm doing is just reading and recording, and I'm not making any noise kind of at that time. So for me, it's like, okay, this is what I'm focusing on right now because it's what's bringing me joy, and then the next step. So it kind of cycles on itself a little bit. Yeah, hopefully.
That's interesting. Oh, sorry.
No,
Go ahead, Jaimee.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment on when you're reading and doing your research, you're not making any noise. But what about like just, when you pick up your cup of coffee or like those sorts of things that produce a sound? That's not part of it, or?
Yeah, it is, but that would be, oh, I need to go record this, and then there's where I'm practicing, or like I make a point of like setting up like I'm not rigid, but I make a point of at some time during the day I'm spending at least like 20 minutes playing the theremin. At some time during this week I'm going to spend this much time reading, and it's not like I fail myself if I don't do that every week, but setting those like little achievable goals I think are really important, and that's practice, just like doing it regardless of whether you're in the mood of it. But on a more macro scale, I do find myself going through these phases where I'm like intaking a lot of knowledge and reading a lot of things and maybe out recording a lot and not really spending a lot of time putting it all together. I think it's like kind of you gotta go collect the stuff and then you gotta glue it together. Like you gotta go collect the pine cones and then you can make the wreath, right? So, like,
Jaimee, go ahead.
Like
oh, sorry, you weren't
No.
done. I'm sorry, Christina.
I think my thought has mostly left me. I don't remember what I was going to say, but just in terms of my own work, I think it's practice-based research for me. And I kind of like what Christina was touching on. There's this real ebb and flow of how much you feel like you're doing at certain points, or maybe what you're not doing. And it's interesting. I don't ever think about that until we have these conversations. I'm not performing a piece and listening to my body and thinking, oh, I'm researching right now. It's just this really organic process. And so the whole idea of having to define it is confusing to me as an artist sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly what we do in theater, Christina. Collect the things and glue them together. Yes. Yeah. Yep. I just spent a whole week gluing things together. So yeah. Any final thoughts or questions or anything before we wrap this up? We are just about at the end of our time here.
I just want to say thank you for listening and for inviting me and for sharing. It's lovely to have a update. So
Yes, yeah, it was good to see you too. It's been forever, and I'm glad to see you tonight, and appreciate you coming and sharing your ideas and your thoughts. And hopefully we've all taken away something from this as far as what research creation can be, what it does for each of us. And I mean, this is a conversation that we can have all night, right? You're welcome, Courtney. Thank you for coming. Monique, thank you as well. Anything else from? Thank you, Marianne. Thanks, Tarek. Any final parting words?
Other than thank you.
Thank
We're talking, here about how thought-provoking that this whole discussion has been, and how, even, those of us who have been doing this for potentially quite a bit longer, still have these same kinds of like questions and thoughts, and how when we're in the middle of the practice, we often aren't thinking of it as research, even though it is, and how are we using those definitions and what that means, like in our own lives for our own jobs and our own purposes. When is it necessary? When is it not? Like all of these things, like this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thanks, Julia. All right, again, thank you all for coming. Appreciate your time and have a great night. And we'll hope to see you at our next event in January.
Bye.
Bye.
You.